So I think because we've had a slight change of plan, we'll hear from Madeline next, and then we'll have a short comfort break, which isn't in the schedule, but it'll give you a chance to stretch your legs before we then move on to Matthew. Okay. Our next guest is Madeline Black. Madeline recognises that she was a victim of a crime that left her silent for many years, but she's now found her voice, and boy does she use it, not just for her, but for so many who can't find theirs yet. Sexual violence is so deeply entrenched in our culture, and Madeline hopes that by simply speaking out and writing about it, she can help to combat it by reducing the stigma while promoting a cultural change. She's certainly felt the power and healing effects in sharing her story, and hopes that her book, Unbroken, which I've got to say is a must-read, will help other victims of sexual violence, crime, PTSD, and anyone who has struggled with forgiveness. She wants to spread her message. It's not what happens to us that's important, but what we do with what happens to us. And if we choose to, we can get past anything that happens to us in life. Madeline previously visited Break the Silence and spoke to a number of our survivors who greatly appreciated her taking the time to share her story. Madeline, again, like Nina, has a few of her books here today for anyone who wishes to purchase a copy. So Madeline, over to you. Thank you.
Three more women have now come forward about my boss. As a man, you've really made me think. I've finally been able to tell my mum. I hope, after you've heard me speak today, that you'll be able to find your voice too and speak out. Yeah. Today I'm going to be telling you about what happened to me, how I healed from those events, and how, by making a choice, I changed my thinking and my mindset, completely transforming my life. At 13 years old, I knew that my childhood was over. And it all began with a night out.
This was, This was back in the late 1970s, and I had a friend at school that was totally opposite from me. She was so cool. So she came up with a plan to have this night out, and I said yes. Somehow we managed to convince the local off-licence that we were both over 18, I don't know how, and we purchased a bottle of vodka, which we took to a local cafe. We mixed it with orange juice, and we drank it in secret under the table. Now, I was 13, I was half the size I am now, and I'd never drunk before. So I proceeded to get drunk very quickly. In fact, I threw up everywhere, and we were kicked out. Two of the young men on our table put us into a black taxi and took us back to her mum's empty flat. You see, we had both lied about where we were staying because her mum was away. I've often wondered about that taxi driver from that night. Didn't he have a mother, a daughter, a sister? Couldn't he see what was already taking place in the back of his taxi? But no, he chose to ignore it. His only concerns were that I wouldn't throw up and to get me there as quickly as possible. By this stage, when we arrived at the block of flats, I was legless, and the two of them very unelegantly walked me up the 4 flights of stairs, bumping me up every way to her mum's empty flat. When we arrived, they put us into separate bedrooms, and it became very clear very early on that they weren't there to undress me, to let me sleep off the alcohol, that they were there for something else. It's very odd what takes place when being raped by 2 men. I found myself paying attention to a party that was taking place in the communal gardens outside, and I'm lying there wondering, are they having chicken? Are they having beef? Are they having kebabs? Are they having burgers? Anything to avoid being present in the scene of the crime, my body. And when my attention came back into the room, I noticed that going around the top of the wall, there was a border that was made out of pink and grey bows. and I counted these bows over and over and over again. But when the violence escalated, the counting didn't work anymore, and I found myself leaving my body. It was very surreal because here I am on the floor, tied by a wrist and an ankle to the pipes of the radiator, and here I also am, sitting on top of the wardrobe, watching the scene down below. Very near to the end, the one that I shall just call the worst one, picked up his knife, held it to my throat. "If you tell anyone, we will come back and find you and we will kill you." And you know what? I believed him. In the morning, I could hear this sound, this jingly jangly noise, and I thought they're coming back. They're in the door, that's the keys. But no, the sound now was from the bracelets that were on my friend's wrist. You see, she was now in the bed next to me. She was still dressed. I was now naked. She hadn't been touched at all. I now had injuries on my body that I had really no idea at that point how I had occurred, but my mind had shut them off. I had those elements of semen, excrement, blood on my body. There were bites, bruises, cuts. I had been burnt with cigarettes on my thighs and my breast, and I had been stabbed. Everything was so hazy in that moment. I really had no idea. The only thing that was clear to me, as clear as a cloudless sky, was that nothing would ever be the same. After that, I ran the hottest bath that I could run, and I gingerly stepped into it, scrubbed my body as much as I could, and then I got dressed. Now, even at 13, I had absorbed the victim-blaming messages that are out there, and we both decided to clean up the flat as well as we could and not speak about it, because I had been drinking, I lied about where I was staying, surely I had brought this on myself, this was my fault. And then we both went our separate ways. She went home to her grandma's, which is where she was meant to be staying, and I went back to my parents' house. The next day was Monday, school day. I went back as if nothing had happened, but what I know now is that what we don't speak about leaks out of us. Because I couldn't find my voice, I couldn't say what had happened, I wasn't really sure what had happened, and it leaked out of me in so many ways. I developed an eating disorder, I became anorexic, I used drugs and alcohol to numb out, to not feel, to shut down. I had so many fears, so many phobias. But the worst thing really is not the injuries on your body, because they can heal, it's what it did to my mind. I believed that I was worthless, dirty, contaminated, and I really just thought, what is the point to being me? What is my purpose in this life? Everyone would be better off without me. So just a few weeks before my 14th birthday, I took as many of my mum's pills that I could find in her bathroom cabinet, tried to end my life. Clearly, it didn't work, but can you imagine what I felt like when I woke up, not even knowing I'd had my stomach pumped, and I thought, you can't even kill yourself. You can't even get that right. What a failure you are. From there, I was transferred to a children's psychiatric ward, part of Great Ormond Street in London, and I would spend 2 months. Interestingly, when I was writing my memoir, Unbroken, I applied for my notes. I wanted to see if they had any idea why a normal-ish 13-year-old girl turned into one overnight who couldn't speak, who couldn't eat, and hated herself. They had no idea. Nobody ever asked me any questions in there, what had happened to you. Their main concerns were me putting weight on and filling me with antidepressants. After a couple of months, I was allowed home because I put on a bit more weight, but my behaviour just got worse. I just rebelled and partied hard, using a lot more drugs and alcohol. And I had no respect for my body at all. So whilst I was out at these parties, if a guy tried it on, I would say yes. There was also a fear that if I didn't say yes, that things would get violent again. And I thought it was easier just to let them do whatever they want. So I became really promiscuous, which I know is one of the many, many side effects you can have after being raped. So I earned myself a bit of a name. Around this time, my mum and dad discovered that I was smoking a lot more dope than they knew about. They did the worst thing that any parent could possibly do to a teenage child. They called all of my friends' parents to tell them what we were up to. Can you imagine how popular I was? So at that point at school, nobody was speaking to me. Nobody wanted to know me. I would put on my uniform, go to the park, sit in the swings, smoke a few joints, and then go home at the end of the day. So when they suggested to me, you know, maybe it's a good idea to get away, travel overseas, get away from all the bad influences, I thought, what have I got to lose? So I agreed. So just before my 17th birthday, I went to Israel for a year. I spent 6 months on a kibbutz and I worked in a town called Ashkelon. And very near to the end, about 4 weeks near to the end, I met this blonde, blue-eyed Glaswegian. He's not really so blonde anymore, he actually doesn't really have much hair anymore, and called Stephen. And he was the first man and I felt safe with. And I think safe is a really weird word to use when we talk about relationships, but instinctively I knew that this man would never harm me and I could trust him, which was great. I came back to London, he went back to Glasgow, and he still wanted to see me. And I was like, I couldn't understand why he still wanted to see me. I just thought it was a holiday thing. I would drive the poor man mad. What do you see me? How can you possibly like me? How can you say you love me? And over time, with his love, I saw that I was lovable, that I was able to give love back in return and slowly start to like myself, maybe even love myself one day. So after about 5 years, we realized that things were getting serious, and he popped the question. Just before I said yes, I had to make sure that he remembered what I told him when I first met him. You see, I decided I would never become a mum. I thought that giving birth was just going to be like being raped again. And I thought there's no way that I can put myself into that situation. The thought of men down at my cervix, my legs and stirrups, it terrified me. And he was okay. He said, that's fine. I can remember the exact moment that I completely reversed my thinking on motherhood. You know, I don't know why I live in Scotland, because I love the sunshine, but we would save all of our annual leave every year and go away in the winter for 4 or 5 weeks, somewhere warm and exotic. We were walking on a beach in Thailand called Koh Phi Phi, a beautiful island, and Stephen says, how about starting a family? And already with my usual response of, Stephen, you know why I can't do that. But something came in, and I thought, if I never become a mum, these 2 young men, I'm still giving them all their power and control over me. And I thought, I don't want to do that anymore. So it was there and then that I came up with a plan that I call my best revenge. That not only would I become a mum, but I would be determined to live my life as well as I could, refusing to be identified by what had happened to me. So we came back from Thailand, and I researched therapists and went into therapy. And 2 years later, Anna was born. Looking down at that bundle in my arms with that mop of black hair and those big brown eyes is still one of the greatest days of my life. And then 3 years later, along came Mimi. And then 5 years later, Layla completes my trio of gorgeous girls. And you know, I really thought that that was it. I've done the thing that I think I could never do. I'm healed. I realise now we can convince ourselves of anything. And actually, I was still filled with phobias, still filled with fear. But I thought, you know, I'm okay. And it was actually through my children that I started to see my fears. And then I thought, what would be the point of bringing these girls into this world if I then go ahead and fill them with my fears? One of the examples I have is when Anna turned 11, she was going to high school. Like her friends, she wanted to go on the bus, the public bus, and go with her friends to school. And I'm like, no way, I don't know who's going to be on the bus, who you'll sit with, what they'll do. My head was going crazy. But I thought, no, I have to let her be independent. How will she ever learn to be streetwise if I hold her back? So I gave her a rape alarm, as you do. I told her not to listen to her music and sit by the driver. What she didn't know was that I also got into my car and I drove behind the bus to make sure she got to school. And I thought, this is crazy. This had to stop. Another example was when I was training to become a psychotherapist. I had always worked in women's organisations. I've worked at Women's Aid for 14 years, Rape Crisis for about 6 years. Hadn't worked much with men. One of my first clients was as wide as he was tall, and he sat down opposite me with his legs wide open, and I'm thinking, shit, I was going to sit there. What will I do if he attacks me? How will I get out of the room? And I'm like, what kind of therapist am I going to be if all I'm concerned about was my safety in the room? And it showed me another level, another layer of my fear. So I am quite extreme. When I decide to clean up, I decided to face my fears, because there were two acronyms that came to mind. There was false evidence appearing real, or face everything and rise. And I opted for the second one at that point in my life. So I asked the receptionist to only give me male clients. I don't want to see any more women, no more couples, just men. And I was terrified. I really was, so apologies to the men in the room. And then I got one client. And at my college, they used to say to us that you get the clients that you need, that they are really for you. And this particular client, I think I got more than he maybe got from me. You see, he told me he had been raped when he was 13 years old. And as we worked through his trauma, he still scrubbed his skin all day, just like me. He also changed his underwear a few times a day, thinking that he could smell them on his body. And I thought, gosh, he thinks and feels just like a woman. And then I realized that he thinks and feels just like a human being. And that really changed my way of working with men. It really helped to dilute my fears. And then I decided that the things I really were challenged by were working with men and being out of control. So I decided to challenge myself at all the areas where I thought being out of control would be too much. At 41, I went to a karate club, a room filled with men. There's maybe 40, 50 men, about 5 of us women in our karate suits. Again, terrified when I first went to my class. But you know, it showed me that I have seen the worst of men and I have seen the best of men. There were such great guys in my karate club. I also learnt windsurfing, which is quite an extreme way to challenge yourself. And the first time, more than the first time, years, my sail would fall in. I'd have to be rescued. I'd be panicking. The safety boat wouldn't see me. And it got me thinking that it's a little bit like life. You know, there are times when I can get the safety boat and I can be rescued, but there's other times when I have to swear to myself, dig in deep and talk very strongly, pick up my sail, get back into my magic 7 position, look in the direction I'm going and just start sailing back to the beach. And again, I thought, great, this is it. I've challenged all my fears, I'm really okay. Still convincing myself that all these other fears and phobias were non-existent. Then there were a combination of 3 events. I was studying psychotherapy, I was doing tons of personal development, and Anna, my eldest daughter, turned 13. Out of nowhere, flashbacks, nightmares, memories just came flooding in. And at first I thought, I'm going mad. Surely, if it was so bad, I'd remember that. Now I understand it's because it was so bad, my mind shut it off until it thought I was ready to face it. I didn't quite agree with it at the time. So I went back to therapy, in the worst light possible, because I said, I want you to take these pictures away. I don't want to see them anymore, because it was like a porn film in my head, but I was the star of that film. And he kind of laughed at me, my therapist, not in a mean way, but I saw that my way in was going to be my way out. That for once I had to find a way to accept all that was done to me, knowing that I can't change any of it and be okay. And I started to see that my denying all of these memories was actually now causing me more distress than the memories themselves. My refusal to believe that that had happened to me was actually now worse. Whilst I was having the therapy, something else happened to me, and it was very odd. I started to see that there was someone else present on that night, and I thought, I can't tell him now. I will be locked up. He'll send me straight back to the psychiatric ward. You see, I started to see that there was a Tibetan monk by my side from that night when I was getting raped. And it didn't make any sense to me at all. There was one particular time when the worst one thought it would be a good idea to try to set me on fire, to light my hair. He flicks open his Zippo lighter, lights the flame, and this monk is next to me. He just leans across me and just blows out the flame. And he strikes the lighter again. He just blows out the flame again and again, until he's so frustrated, he just drops it. And so the more I denied my memories, the faster and harder the pictures came in. The more I denied this monk's presence, I would see him. I would feel a swish of his fabric. I would feel him stroke my face and telling me that it's going to be okay. You know, at night I had so many nightmares for those 3 years I was last in therapy. I would wake up screaming and crying next to my husband in the bed. Every time I woke up, the men's faces were hovering above me, and the monk was always by my side. It was a very busy bedroom. But I thought I have to tell the therapist because this is now crazy. And I found my voice and I told him, and he said, yeah, that can happen. He said, you were so close to being killed that night, but you were just taken to another dimension. You just saw your protector. And it's still quite hard for me to understand it all, but I had to realize that if I don't accept all that was done to me, and if I don't accept that the monk was part of it as well, I'm going to drive myself crazy. So I had to find a way to be okay with both sides of it. Very near to the end of my therapy, my therapist suggested to me that, you know, maybe these two young men weren't born rapists. And I was like, how dare he say that to me? I was so angry with him. You see, for years, I fantasized about somebody kidnapping the two of them, taking them to an empty flat, beating them up, tying them up, raping and torturing them for 4 or 5 hours on end, just like they had done to me. But he planted a seed in my head, and that seed started to grow, and I found myself wanting to understand. How could these two young men, who weren't much older than me, maybe 17 or 18, know to be so violent towards another human being? And it reminded me something of my manager said to me, Anne, who works at the counselling centre where I work, she said something to me years ago which came back to me. You see, she used to be a midwife, and she said that she has delivered thousands of babies, and she never once met an evil baby. And that always stayed with me, and I believed her. I do believe her, that we all come in a blank sheet. We all come in neutral, and somehow, with our experiences in life, we get contaminated, we get conditioned. And I found myself wondering about these two young men. And I realized, you know, when they were dehumanizing me, they're only really dehumanizing themselves. that they weren't connected into their source, their goodness, their light, whatever you want to call it. And somehow I started to feel compassion towards these two young men. You see, I have tried to live my life as best as I possibly could, but I thought they'd have to live with what they have done to another human being, and I can't imagine that will be an easy path to walk. And so forgiveness came into me. And I'm not saying that in order to heal, you have to go out and forgive your abuser, the rapist. That's not what I'm saying at all. This was my path. This was my choice. This is how I did it. And forgiving was really for giving me a better chance. Because I saw if I was still filled with that hate, revenge, and anger, they had no idea. The only person it was hurting was me, my husband, and the kids that I struggled to have for years. And so I saw really that if I have a choice, then we all have a choice. Do you have any events, hurts, or disappointments that you hold on to? And if you do, what purpose do they serve? And could you, like me, accept the facts for what they were, knowing that they can't be changed, and be okay with that? Forgiveness really was my key to freedom. It really released any chains that I had left in the past. So how do I go from being someone that was so ashamed, so mortifully ashamed, to someone that now writes and speaks about sexual violence, rape? I was attending workshops run by a man called Imaho, who's a teacher of life, been going for many years, and he knew my story. And he said, you know, it would be a really good idea for you to write it down. And I'm like, there's no way. There's no way I'm writing it down for you to read or anyone else to read, because I was so ashamed. It was as if I thought if people knew what had happened to me, they would change their opinion of me, that they wouldn't like me anymore, as if what had happened was a reflection of me. They do say as speakers you should never quote quotes unless you're absolutely sure, but I know this one to be sure. 100% of all rapes are caused by rapists. I know that is true. But he made this suggestion, and I would stop it and start it until one day, about 4 years later, I was at one of his workshops in Switzerland, in Basel, and I went back to my room. I picked up my iPad, and my fingers just went into automatic, and I started to write and write and write, and he said to write down all the details, all the names, all the bits of information. And before I knew it, 3-4 hours later, 12 pages had appeared. And I told him I've written down my story, and he said, great, can you send it to me? And I went, okay, what are you going to do with it? And he told me that he would like to use my story at one of the workshops. And I was like, oh no, this is different from you knowing to then 200 or 300 people knowing. But he said, your story is really going to help people. For a start, some people don't understand the violence other people can experience. They live a bit in the bubble. But for other people that have struggled, he wanted them to see that you can walk it through. You can end up living a life with no hate or revenge in your heart. So I agreed. I trusted him. He'd been my teacher for many years. And in 2014, in Teufen, another place in Switzerland, he shared my story at his teachings. Whilst he was speaking, I was still in Glasgow. I had a sense of all of my words flying around, and I thought, he has let them read what I had written. I was like, I'm never able to walk back into another workshop. They all know all of these details about me. And he confirmed that, yes, they had read what I had written, and it was really great. It really helped people. Now, I had booked to go to Cork in Ireland to one of his workshops just a few weeks later, and I thought, I have to go. I have to find a way to work this shame, because that was still showing me I still had so much shame. I was still so concerned what people thought about me. What I didn't know, just before I went to the workshop, was that he had told everyone to give her some space, respect her, don't speak to her about it. So when I walked into the room, everybody just looked down at their shoes and ignored me. I just felt like I had walked into the room naked. I felt so exposed in that moment, but it kind of shattered my shame. You know, it kind of just made me think, okay, they know the worst possible thing about me, and I'm still okay, you know. I saw that I really am not the things that are done to me. I am not my body. I am so much more than that. And I saw that the real essence of me, those two men could never touch that. Now the workshops last for about 3 or 4 days, and people couldn't keep their silence for that long. And they started to slowly come and speak to me. Little by little, I would get men and women that had also been raped, and they told me how hearing my story gave them some hope, that they could heal as well, they could turn their hate, their hurt into something positive. And then another man spoke to me, a German man, who said that he had been conned by a business partner and he owed him a load of money. He was so resentful for years, and he saw if I could forgive those two men, he could just learn to let it go. And he did. And I was beginning then to understand the power that comes when we share our stories. When the idea of forgiveness came to me, I did what anybody does when they have a new idea or something, some new information. I went to Google and typed in forgiveness. I came up with this organisation in London called the Forgiveness Project, which is run by a superhuman called Marina Cantagazuno. She, with the powers of social media, learnt about my story, and she asked if she could put it up on her website, because she collects stories of forgiveness, not about preaching forgiveness, just to show what people have been through and what they can achieve. And I thought, okay, there's one thing letting 200-300 people at a workshop that I know. There's another thing going public. But she said to me, you know, you don't need to put your photo, you don't need to put your name. And I thought, no, you know, I don't want to be ashamed anymore. I've had enough of hiding. I once spoke at a university in Northampton, and just before me, a woman spoke about trauma. And she said that holding on to our shame is like keeping a beach ball constantly underwater. That's all I remembered from her speech, because I thought, that's me. I've worn this mask and pretended I'm just, you know, the best mother, the best wife, whatever. But all the time I'm holding this beach ball underwater, and I thought, it's time to let go of my beach ball. So, the 22nd of September 2014 is a date that I will never forget, because that is the day that I shared my story publicly online for the first time, with my photo and my name, ending 35 years of my silence. Sharing my story has opened doors for me in ways I could never have imagined. I've been asked to speak all over the place. I've done radio, TV interviews. I've been in magazines, newspapers, and I've written my book. And I'd like to take you back to just a few months before my book was published, when I really learnt the powers that can come when we share our stories. My publishers said to me to not do too much PR, to hold back till when the book was out, which made perfect sense. But I was contacted by BBC Radio 4, and they invited me to be interviewed for their one-to-one series, a programme about redemption. And when I heard who it was that was going to interview me, I decided to completely ignore their advice, and I said yes, straight away. You see, I was going to be interviewed by the legend that is Sir Trevor MacDonald. I mean, what would you have done? Sir Trevor. So, and I also grew up with this dad who was obsessed with the news. He listened at 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. So when I met him, it was his voice. It was just so familiar. We did the interview, which went well. It was amazing. But to me, it's what took place once my interview was aired that was far more amazing. A friend of mine, Sandra, told me that her mother had been listening. And when she went to see her that evening, she said she was so animated in a way that she'd never seen before. And when she went round, she said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Oh, Sandra, I heard this woman on the radio today. She spoke so well." I said, "Mum, what are you talking about?" She said, "You know, just like her, I thought it was my fault all these years. I thought I was to blame. I thought I had brought it on myself. But she made me see it differently." Sandra's like, "Mum, what are you saying? I was raped too when I was a teenager, just like the woman on the radio was when she was 13. And in that moment, my friend's 81-year-old mother ended 64 years of her silence. My friend has said that it has now opened up a space between them that was never there before, a bridge, and they now share things they never shared. She also thinks that if she hadn't heard me that day on the radio, she would have taken her secret to the grave. She has seen the joy in her mum's smile merely from connecting with a woman on the radio who understood. But it got me thinking about all the other men and women out there that have locked themselves into a prison of silence due to their guilt, their fear, their shame. Every time I'm asked to speak, I think of that one woman. She has single-handedly shown me the power that comes when we share our stories. She is my motivation, and she is the reason I will continue to speak out. Thank you.
I did say in my introduction that it was an amazing story, and I would urge you to read Madeline's book. So before we move on, I think we'll have a quick 10-minute comfort break, if that suits everyone. So it's now 2:10. If we move back here for 20 past, would that do? I'll see you back here then. There's also the opportunity, because we missed the chance at lunch break, if anyone wants to enter the prize draw for the hamper, then you can deposit your envelopes in the bucket on the table at the side there. And your pledge cards. Thank you.
I remember who it was, Green Mason, read all down the floor. It was a documentary on toxic masculinity. I'm sure it's on YouTube. Yeah. 3 of them.
Interesting. And feel free to say no, as I know you would.
It's not.
Something I was looking at is the spin camera still
Yeah, thank you.
And then you can have it and also like as a follow thing like film or like the